Welcome everybody. I'm going to start with a brief introduction to the Co-Production Lab and Co-Production Network for Wales, just so you can find out a little bit more about us. We are primarily a membership organisation, and we have a mission to embed the practice of co-production and involvement in public services in Wales. And we have a couple of different types of membership. The first one being individual membership, and that's free, and it gives you, as a single individual, access to our member events. We hold co-pro conversations, so you can find out what co-production looks like in different settings, our online community platform, where you can get engaged with other people, find out what's going on, ask for help and support. And also we have a regular newsletter that comes out. We then have team membership, and our team membership is a paid membership to join if you're an organisation. And this tends to be where you have a strategic and operational commitment to co-production and citizen involvement. You might want to develop your team, your organisational practice. And this comes with champions training, advisory sessions with our consultants, and discounts on e-learning. And then we have a fantastic e-learning course. It's a 12-week tutor-led program. It's called Co-Production and You, and it really is an opportunity to get some more of the basics around co-production, build them out, try out some tools, and share that experience with people. And we also have a shorter self-led 2-hour course just to give you a fundamentals of co-production, bit of a taster really. And then also at the network we have our Dowie project, which is a 5-year programme working with public services boards across Wales. In terms of the work that we do at Co-Production Lab, this is our consultancy trading arm, and this is where we provide services to public and third sectors. You can find training, project support, we can help with facilitation, co-evaluation, and also coaching and mentoring. And all the surplus from the lab is used to sustain and develop the network and enables us to provide free membership for individuals and create more co-production and resources. So if you want to know any more about any of those things, please get in touch with us. So before I hand over to Trina and really get us stuck into looking a bit more closely at co-production, I've got a little Menti that I'd like to share with you. So I will just pull that up on the screen. So you should be able to see some instructions. And what I'd like to invite you all to do is head over to menti.com. You can use the QR code on the screen. If you go to menti.com and enter the code 47795145, I've also put the link in chat. And we have a short question that I'd like to invite you all to just take a few seconds, a minute or so, just to think about and enter that into Menti, which is, what words come to mind when you think of co-production? So anything, when I ask that question, that's just popped into your head. If for any reason you're unable to access Menti, please feel free to put those words into chat and we can see them there. So I'll just wait for people to log in, have a bit of a look around at it. And we can see your responses starting to come in. It's great to start our session off today with a little bit of involvement and invite you into our space as well. So it's great to see that happening. And we like to start off lots of our sessions like this. Trina and I are big fans of getting people warmed up and ready to do a bit of thinking. So I see some great words coming through there. Collaboration, the really big one in the middle. When our words are big on Menti, that means more than one person is entering that word. So we can see things around partnership, power sharing, really interesting space to move into things around power sharing, inclusion, knowledge, loving that one on the side, evolving, really thinking about it as a process as well, that maybe suggests. Learning from experts, ownership, empowerment, pride, lots of different variations of inclusion and sustainability coming through there. So really great to see those responses coming in. I will just move a box out, just to make sure Wow, thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to leave that sort of in the background, so that link will remain. You can dip back into that, have a look at maybe any extras that have been added at some point. So, and then we'll have a nice word cloud to go along with the slides at the end of the day. So I will drop that screen down, and I'm going to hand over to Trina, who will take you through the next part.
Lovely. Thank you, Becky. Becky's got a very soothing voice, hasn't she? So you'll have to have my voice now. I'm going to share my screen in a moment. I'm going to give you a bit of a whistle-stop, very brief overview of what we mean by co-production, looking at the definition we use at the network, looking at the values of co-production, and then looking at what we call the spectrum of engagement. If you have any questions while I'm sharing my screen, please do pop them into the chat, and we will come to, we've got a Q&A at the end, so we will save up those questions and make sure we have time to get through them at the end. So do use the chat while I'm sharing my screen, if anything pops into your mind. Okay, so co-production and citizen involvement. I'll explain later where the involvement comes in. So this is the definition that we use at the co-production network and lab. And we're talking about co-production within public services, and that's quite important because it can have very different meanings if you go into different sectors, particularly the media sector. It's something very different to the co-production we talk about. So our definition, co-production in public services means that people who provide and deliver services and people who access and receive services share power and responsibility and work together for mutual benefit in equal, reciprocal, and caring relationships. It's quite a long, that's one big long sentence with lots of words. And actually the way we work isn't like that and is far more accessible and inclusive, but we do need a definition. So we tend to refer to this definition when we're doing training, and then we don't tend to come back to this one line, but it's to demonstrate to you what we mean. So it's very much about people coming together, sharing the reciprocity, the trust, relationships, and we've deliberately put in the word caring because fundamental to co-production is this authenticity that we do care and that it does matter and that we want to create and support change. So we have to care about each other and we have to care about the thing that we're trying to change. So co-production enables people to access relevant and meaningful support when they need it. It enables services to be effective and to make a positive difference in people's lives. And it enables people, services, and communities to become more effective agents of change. Co-production is all about changing something. In public services, it's about systems change. We're trying to introduce and support a different approach to the way we work. So in other words, co-production is strength-based. We look at what we've got and how to build on that. We draw on lived experience and we combine it with learned experience. And we do that to develop these person and community-centered solutions to address challenges in public services and communities. So it's very much about everybody coming together to look at services we deliver, services we receive, and how can we get the full picture of what that looks like, what it feels like without us all being there together. So this is just a quick diagram just to position co-production. So it's not to say other things are not right or not valid. It's just to show you where co-production sits. So you'll see on the left there, we've got the blue circle that says citizens, which means people and communities. And on the right, we've got the yellow circle, which is organizations. It's in the middle. It's where these two cross over that we get co-production. So if we start quickly with the blue circle, citizens, if we've got people working with people in community groups, if anyone in that group, everyone in that group is not wearing their professional hat, they're people as part of a community working together, that's what we would call community organizing, which is really valuable and has many, many strengths and is necessary and needed. Over on the yellow circle, we've got organizations. So now this is people with their professional caps on. So whether it's within an organization and it's internal teams working with other teams, or whether it's organizations working with other organizations, as long as it's all people, professionals wearing their professional hats, that's what we call collaboration. Also very important, also very valuable, also necessary. It's when these combine, it's when we have our professional hats and our no professional hats coming together, our people and our professionals coming together with reciprocity and equality, that's where co-production sits. So we need at the table professionals, and we need at the table that lived experience voice as well. And it's only when we've got that combination that we can start to look at the co-production. This is just to give you a bit of context on why we say co-production and citizen involvement. So in Wales, we have a particular piece of legislation, the Future Gens Act, and in that act, they refer to involvement, and the Future Gens Office use that interchangeably with co-production, but in the legislation itself, you will see the term involvement. So we always say co-production and involvement, and they mean one and the same thing. If you get technical, there are some differences between the two. But if you hear us talk about co-production and involvement, it's very much the same thing. And it's in Wales that's quite specific. Out of Wales, it would just refer to co-production. And as you'll see, it's one of those 5 ways of working as part of the Act. Okay, I'm whizzing through. These are the things we go through in a lot of detail over our half-a-day training. So I'm just skimming the surface here. So these are our 5 values of co-production. And I'm just going to talk through each one. These are the things that really matter. We can get hung up and caught up in definitions and what is and isn't co-production, but really it's about these values. And if we can embed these values into our work, across our work, then if and when opportunities arise that we can co-produce, we're going to be in a really strong position to do that. So the first one is to value all participants and build on their strengths. As we said, this is very much strength-based. Everyone who comes into that co-production space will bring a strength, and whether that is from their lived experience or from their learned and professional experience, it is a value. And so we need to acknowledge, we need to understand all the different values, and we treat them equally. So the value they bring is equal to each other, however that looks. The second one is to develop networks across silos. So if I give the example, if we go back into our organizations, maybe we've got a team A and a team B, and we've got our different objectives, our different targets, our different remits. Sometimes team A might need a bit of information from team B, so they might just pop across down the hall to the team B office just to get that information, and then they'll go back to team A and carry on working with their team. In co-production, we're saying we just have one team. So it's really important to look at the who do we need at that table? And that includes decision makers. What we're looking for is that to share responsibility, to share risk, to share power, we need to be able to make decisions. So we need to ensure that everyone is in that room that enables us to make decisions. So it's not about going back to team B to say, we've done all this work, can you approve it? But it's about having team B in the room with us. So it's about coming together as one. The third one, doing what matters for the people involved. So we know everyone brings a strength and a value. We know we're all in together. What are we doing there? It has to be relevant for everyone around that table. And whether it's relevant to a person's personal life or whether it's relevant to their professional life, there needs to be a connection to the thing we're trying to change or the thing we're trying to work on. The fourth one, this is the big one, building relationships of trust and sharing power. We have to build trust. As I mentioned earlier, authenticity is co-production. We can't do it without that. And so we can't pretend we've got trust. We either have it or we don't have it. And the only way we can move towards sharing power is if we have trust. So we have to resource time to really build those connections, to get to know each other, to learn what is the value each person next to me is bringing, what is the value I'm bringing. We have to really understand that, and that trust has to be authentic. Once there's trust there, once everyone's feeling the trust, that is when we can start to look at how we share the power. It's absolutely vital that we build trust between the people. And finally, people could be change makers and organizations become enablers. So this is that systems change. This is where traditionally services are delivered, services know best, and they deliver to and for people. Co-production is saying and supporting the idea that it's people who have that lived experience, who've experienced the services, who have felt those services, provide a really big missing part of the puzzle when we're looking at how to design and deliver services. So how can we use the resources and the knowledge and the power that we have as professionals to enable people who have the knowledge and the power of having received that service to influence and to be involved in the change that needs to happen? So it's that shift from delivering to people to involving people in and designing with those who have experienced it. Okay, these are two ladders of participation. So these are two models that we have used at the network for inspiration. We've got the Arnstein on the left, and then we've got the Think Local Act Personal on the right. I won't read them actually, I'll let you read them, but it's to show that there are many different levels or different layers of engagement. The Arnstein was designed to look at the gap between government power and citizens, and to try and look at ways to decrease that gap. You'll see words there like coercion, manipulation, moving up through consultation and engagement with co-production at the top, and citizen power at the top on the other one. These are really good for just starting to think about the different ways we can engage with people. So we've used that, but we've changed it because we felt like the ladders cause us to think we have to get to the top in order to win. And if we're climbing, we can't go back down. And co-production to us is far more fluid than that. And also we value each of the different types of engagement. So we've taken those ladders and used them for inspiration, and we flipped them on their side to make what we call our spectrum of engagement. So if we look from the left to the right, we've got doing to in the purple, doing for in the pink, and doing with in the green. As I said, you could be in purple and be looking to move into pink. You could be in green, but you need to go back to pink to strengthen the green. So it's very much about moving through it. And the spectrum is there just to help us to think, where are we? Are we in the right place? And do we need to change anything to move along that spectrum? And it's not to say that any part of that spectrum is wrong. So the purple doing to, things like education and protection. If you think about safeguarding, or we think about emergency medical aid, that's doing to. We really need doing to save lives or to protect lives. That's absolutely what we need. If I'm having a heart attack, I need someone who knows what they're doing to bring that medical expertise to come and save my life. And I don't need that person to sit next to me and start to talk to me about what I think would be right for me in that moment. I just need them to save my life. And then perhaps further down my care plan, I can be more involved in what my support and recovery looks like. But in that moment, I need someone to come and do to me. If we move into the doing for, the pink, we've got things like consultation and participation, which many of us are familiar with. And this is where we're starting to invite in the lived experience expert, that voice to come in. But as the professionals, we're still very much holding that power. So consultation, for example, will know what we're trying to find out. So our questions will probably be quite extractive. There's certain things we need to know. And so we're going to ask quite narrow questions to find that out. We'll get that information, and then it's still up to us what we do with the information. Whether we choose to go ahead with something or not is still very much in our decision-making and our power. Then if we move to the doing with, which is the green, this is where co-production involvement sits. This is where it's shared decision-making. This is where we have all the people we need in the space together from the early stages, the whole way through delivery, through evaluation. We're all together making these decisions, thinking of these ideas, developing things, approaching challenges. We're doing that, all of us together, and we're sharing that power together, and we're making those decisions together. So when we're looking at this spectrum and looking at the kind of work we do to see where we sit, those questions can help us. Who holds the knowledge? Who makes the decisions? Who enacts the decisions? Is it the organization, the professionals? Is it the people and the communities, or is it both? And only if it's both, authentically, truly, sincerely, is it both, that's where we're in that green doing with section. Okay. I am going to stop sharing. As I said, that is a very, very short, sharp overview. And we do take half a day in our training to go through all of those in detail. So I hope that's given you a bit of a snapshot as to what we mean by co-production, and what the values are behind it, and the differences in different types of engagement. I'm going to hand back to Becky, who we're going to now just share some very quick case studies with you about some co-production projects we've done as part of the lab, and then we're going to open up for a Q&A at the end. So Becky, I will hand back to you.
Thanks, Trina. And just before I go into the first case study, what was really great was to look back at the Menti, which I was doing behind the scenes then, and just look again at some of those words that have come through. Learning from experts, relationship being in there, and then just see that, that those things are already showing up for you just in the term, which is great. And so just then listening to Trina talk through all that, it's great to see that we're already working and thinking in that space. So yeah, it's good to see, and interesting about the collaboration bit, that we think of that quite quickly, and maybe there's a little bit more around that trust and power, and who's in the room in order to move us into co-production. So that was my little reflection just on there. I just thought I'd throw that in as a bonus. So I'm going to share with you one of our case studies that we've got, a piece of work that we did with Pembrokeshire Dementia Support Carers Card, which has been a really great piece of co-production practice. And so I will just give you a bit of an overview, and then just really pick up on where that difference was made. Again, if any questions come up during when I'm talking, please add them to the Q&A in the chat, and we will save them up for the end. So Pembrokeshire Dementia Supporters Carers Card was something that came out of conversations and co-design sessions with carers in Pembrokeshire. There was a need that was identified for support for when unpaid and family carers were at the really early stages of the dementia journey. They might be at the GP for a first conversation or an early conversation, concerns around a loved one's memory or behaviour. And this really happens prior to that formal diagnosis, so that moment at where those questions are coming up for people, you've noticed something different, and the concerns really starting to come up. And so there was quite a lot of conversation and around that what happens in that space and what can really be done to improve this space for people and support them. And so as part of those co-design sessions that came out of that, the solution that was proposed by the carers was that it would be really useful to have some way of knowing where that early access to information could be. And so an A6 card could be handed to the carer in person at the GP practice, along with some verbal information about that service. And that being about support and access for the carer in this case, and not necessarily the patient. And that card would include the phone number for Pembrokeshire Carers Information and Support Service, and where carers could access support as well as further information. So it was really led from ideas that had come up in, co-design, in conversations between professionals and people, and how could that idea be worked through in terms of the needs of that, recognizing what was the good stuff going on and how could we build on that good stuff. So the problem had been identified by staff on what carers were saying. So they'd really been listened to. This is where, this is where co-production had made a difference. People felt they'd been listened to. They were, being seen, and staff were really hearing what they were saying. And then there was the intention around, so what are we going to do with this? We're not just going to park it. We're actually going to hear it and make a difference. And so this became the result of that actual co-design piece, not taking that idea and working on it in isolation and going, wouldn't this be great? As a member of staff in the GP practice, I know exactly what this needs to look like. But actually sitting down with people and going, okay, so what would be useful? What's the size that needs to be taken away? Really, really simple things in that. And that what really supported that end product that became very simple, accessible, but the impact was very powerful. And the uptake of the cards within the GP surgery and other health professionals across the county has been really successful because it's so relevant to the carers' needs. And in fact, that's gone on to being reprinted. The uptake has been so good. So this is a sustainable piece of work. This isn't just a one-off project. And so there's been a reprint. And this piece of work has also got coordination, support, representation from the GP practice to really support the carers to continue with this and going forward, identify what other needs there might be and what other help there could be, and just supporting that coming together. So a very simple idea. Co-production doesn't have to be all singing or dancing. It can really be something simple that's just grounded in that listening and working equally together. So yeah, really interesting piece of work with them. So that was my case study to share with you. I'm going to hand back to Trina. We like to break the voices up, don't we? And keep you all awake and on your toes. So I'll hand back to Trina, who's got another case study for you.
Thank you, Becky. So my case study is a slightly different stage in a journey. So I'm going to talk to you about a dementia services project we were contracted to work on with the Regional Commissioning Board in Cwmtaf Morgannwg. So we were contacted because the Regional Commissioning Board wanted to look at how to bring in that voice of lived experience to shape the design of their dementia services. They wanted to take steps towards this more meaningful engagement and eventually towards co-production. And they wanted to look at ways to involve their communities within the Cwmtaf Morgannwg region who were experiencing or who had experienced dementia. When this was happening, it coincided with that same Regional Commissioning Board launching a new media campaign to raise awareness of the All Wales dementia care standards. So they thought, this seems two-pronged. How can we involve people to hear what they think? What do they know? What do we need to be doing to improve these services so that they're meeting the standards? Are they meeting the standards, and how? So the aim in terms of bringing in us as the co-production consultants was to support the teams, their internal teams, to enable conditions within their services and their teams for co-production and meaningful engagement. So the first place to start was internally. So they held an event. The first event was to bring together the different teams across the region, all who deliver dementia care services, but who hadn't come together before. So we brought them together in person for a day. And what we learned very quickly was that this doesn't happen. There just isn't time. With all the pressures going on, there isn't time for teams just to come together and to meet each other and to talk. But what it also showed us was that when there is time, when time is made and teams do come together, it's of such value to those teams. So that day was eaten up with teams asking other teams, what do they do? And what does this look like? What does management look like? What's the delivery looking like? How do they do this? Have they experienced this? They had so many questions for each other because they hadn't come together before with space just to talk about that. So they were able to collaborate. We brought them together. They were able to learn who's who. They were able to build some relationships and to collaborate about a service that they all deliver. So the relevance to them was there because they're delivering the same service. The connections were building, the collaboration was happening. That knowledge exchange, that idea development, we're not alone. That team is experiencing exactly what we are. It's so meaningful and really does matter to people to hear that and to be a part of that. After that event, we then went on to deliver co-production training because it also became apparent that there was different knowledge, different experience of co-production, and we needed to ensure that all the teams were working to the same definition of co-production so that when we talked about it, we all knew what that meant and what that looked like. So we delivered introduction to co-production training, and we delivered implementing co-production training internally to the teams, and we did it online to try to support these very, very busy schedules. So that way, each different team had the same definition, the same understanding. Also, by having those training sessions, it enabled further discussion between the teams. It's able to talk about the opportunities and the challenges they had experienced or that they were anticipating when they looked at co-production and engagement. We also delivered introduction to co-production training to a community in a community setting. So it was online, but it was inviting people with lived experience, either direct lived experience or having cared for people with dementia. Any kind of experience of the dementia services were invited to this training session. So we were delivering to the professionals, and we were now delivering also to the personal and the lived experience. So what we were doing in essence was starting to prepare the different groups of people ready to come together further down the line. At that stage, we weren't ready to come together. We were putting in the support that we needed, explaining what it could look like, what it could feel like, what do they need from it in order to be in that space. And that looks very different for different people in different positions. And again, as I said before, in terms of building trust, that's how we're doing that. It's listening to people, hearing what they need in order to work in this way. After the training sessions were delivered, we also held an event for our third sector partners. So we invited a large network of third sector partners to come together and to do some mapping to look at what the dementia services path looks like. What are all the different things happening across the region? What do we know about? What do we not know about? That again was for professionals, but for extending partnership work. So what do our partners know that we don't know? What do we know that our partners don't know? And to do some visualizing and literally mapping out with post-it notes what happens at each stage of that journey. That was then going to be used in a later event where we invited in people with lived experience of dementia care. So we're starting to merge the learning from one and talking it through with the other group. This is still all in the preparation stage. The regional commissioning unit later held an event where they did bring together professionals and that lived experience voice, where they explored together different scenarios to start to get a feel of what it looks like from the professional's position and what it looks like from the person receiving those services, to see where that consensus is and where it doesn't fit. So this case study is about what do we need to do before we get to that space, before we get to that co-production table. How can we support people and enable people to be in that space? We also, as part of that project, put together a kind of a toolkit and a guide with the regional commissioning unit, which the aim of that was to be a resource to go to other teams within other services so that they could use that as almost as a template to replicate if and when they were ready to begin or to further their journey towards co-production. But the message from this case study really is to resource the time it takes to prepare to come together. There's often a rush. We think we have to do co-production because it's a bit of a buzzword sometimes. So we get everybody in a space together and then nobody's sure what to do or how to act or how to make decisions, because it's a very different approach. And whether professional or whether lived experience, whoever we are at that table, it is likely that we haven't worked in that way. What singles co-production out from other engagements methods is that sharing power and sharing responsibility. And that can sound easy on paper, but in practice, it's very tricky. There's a complexity to it and it's very nuanced. And in order for it to work, we have to sit at that table, that metaphorical table, in a different way. And it's one thing to bring people together. It's another thing to enable people to participate when they are together. And that's where the nuance is. And it's about inclusion. What does each person need to hear that person next to them? And what does each person need to be able to contribute and to feel heard? As I say, it's very easy to overlook this step and to rush into co-production. But if we lay the foundations well and meaningfully, then we're in a far stronger position when we are all together to really hear each other, to really learn each other, and to have the mindset we need. And that mindset is one that's open to change and open to doing things differently. And it's letting go of we know best and opening ourselves up to learning what is this new meaningful way that works for everybody. So this dementia case study is about taking those steps with that aim, that ultimate aim for the dementia services in CTM is to be able to co-produce effectively and meaningfully. And they're doing it, they're taking the long journey because that's the way to ensure people can fully participate when they do reach that stage. Okay, so those are our case studies, and we're going to now open up for any questions you may have, either about the case studies that you've heard or any of the slides we've gone through or anything generally about co-production. You can either pop it into chat and we will pick it up. I think Becky has already been, I haven't caught up on chat. Has there already been some questions?
There is a few bits coming in. So I'm just going to answer the one that's out there at the moment is yes, we will be sharing the slides and the case studies, and we will put some links in towards the end for where you can find out more information about membership and the co-production network and the co-production lab. So that will be going in there. That's always a burning question. There was a really interesting question that came into the Q&A, Trina, that I'm going to ask you just to elaborate on a bit more, because I think you'll have some really good examples, which is around evaluation and how do you conduct the formal evaluation of the outcomes of the co-production you support. There's a lack of evidence out there for it. And I know you've been involved in some co-evaluation projects and evaluation of stuff. So it'd be really interesting to hear maybe a couple of examples and what that can look like.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I can't see the question, but I'm going to focus on co-evaluation. Yeah, it's really tricky because co-production is all about outcomes. So we're moving away from outputs, which are easier to monitor and evaluate, and we're looking at outcomes. So we're looking at that change in people's lives. So we try to use, where we can, participatory evaluation. So remember as well that if we are co-producing, and part of co-production is co-evaluation, so we would be designing that evaluation with people. So we'd be talking about what do we need to ask, how do we need to ask it, where do we need to ask it in order to get the answers. But there's a method we often use when we're supporting clients, which is called most significant change, and that's a participatory evaluation method that looks at people's stories. So it would look at I don't know, if there's a program or an intervention through a service. The methodology is looking at people who have accessed that service, and we would ask them a series of very simple questions that very basically says, what did things look like in your life before? What did it look like during that intervention? And what did it look like after? Anything that changed for you in that time, and of those changes, what feels most significant? And that's it. And it's the simplicity of that. But what it does is it gives the power to that person telling the story to really share what something felt like and what shifted for them. So we're not planting any seeds. We're not trying to steer them in any one way. We're trying to hear what actually changed in their life, in that person's life, what changed. And most significant change is really powerful because it does that, because it's the only boundary is giving is it's your life, the person you're talking to. So in MSC, as we call it, we capture those stories, and then we take a selection. We do a bit of a thematic analysis of that. We look at what are those strong themes, what are those big changes that are coming out. And we take a selection of those stories to what's called a story selection panel. And the panel is usually the decision makers or the management, or the people who aren't so involved on the ground, but who make decisions above the ground, and they read through these stories together, and the learning is done through reading the stories. And then you almost follow the same process. So these decision makers now are reading these real life stories, and they're discussing what's changed, what's significant to them in those stories, what's standing out to them. And you can tier the panels, or you can have just separate panels, and it's very interesting to see what's significant to people experiencing the service, what's significant to people designing the service, and what's significant to people who make decisions on that service. And that discussion in itself helps us to look at those outcomes and helps us to feel, what is significant, what is changing for people here. So that's just, there's lots of information out there. If you Google most significant change, there will be plenty on it, but that's an example of a participatory evaluation method. There's also lots of things you can do along the way. Evaluation, often we wait until the end and then we start to ask lots of questions. But actually, if we evaluate as we go along, if we're capturing casual moments is an evaluation method in its own right, is where you capture a casual moment. Someone says something, you write it down, and you've caught it. That thing that felt significant to them in that moment is captured. Being visual, if there's a room that groups often meet in, you can have a map stuck on the wall and post-its that are there. So as people think of things, as people feel things, they add to it. And so you're capturing change and information throughout the journey, so that when you do reach evaluation, you've got this wealth of insight that you might not be able to capture if you just looked retrospectively, but you capture as you go. But to answer simply, it's very tricky to co-evaluate, and to measure outcomes is tricky, because again, it links back to those COPRA values. We're looking at changes in people's lives, and so we need to create space to hear what is the change in that person's life, and then to involve that person in what do we do with that change, what do we do with what they're telling us. So it links then into this, what we call the cycle of co-production. So what we're hearing in this evaluation process, through hearing people, we're then building that connection with that person, we're building that relationship with that person, and then we can invite that person into the next iteration. So what with that learning, what do we do next? So it's always about the next cycle, the next stage. What's the next thing that happens? And to remember, there's no endpoint to co-pro. So wherever we learn from evaluation, we get stronger on the next evaluation of the next iteration.
Brilliant. Thank you, Trina. And just to add, there's that second level, that would be a sort of co-evaluation approach, and it really embeds into those values. And that bit about, looking for the evidence about what, making a more effective service. And there's that, you go back a step, isn't it? And who's deciding what is more effective, I think, is part of that question as well. And by involving people in that, then you set that, what is our measure of effectiveness? What does that look like? So you can really understand where that change has been for people. And it might be my idea of what is effective is nowhere near what somebody else's idea of effective. So there's something about that. And I think in terms of looking for evidence, again, I'd probably point you, we could talk about this and different examples. I know Trina's been involved in loads in this space. But have a look on our website, have a look on CoPro Network. There's some really great case studies. And I would, again, invite you to join as a member, either individual or team. And those are the sorts of questions that you can really ask in the community, and people will demonstrate and give you those examples of practice. And so you can find some sort of weird and wonderful ways as well, and how it's worked, whether that's within health or whether that's within creative arts, across lots of different sectors. So I'm just going to bounce over to the one that's just come through chat then about, it being tricky really when it doesn't align with political and economic drivers, and just note that, yeah, that's right. I mean, I don't think we'd have a particular answer for that, would we, Trina? I think that is quite often there's a misalignment of it. And so recognizing those values, embedding it into practice, can often understand where the tweaks are, where the leverage is in the system, and also not creating false expectation. I think we can have those conversations with people, whether that's a service user, whether that's a patient, whatever that looks like, and be going, actually, this isn't possible. And because we're in an open and honest, and we've built that relationship. Would you add anything to that, Trina?
I would just say that it is in that managing expectations. When we look at who's at that table, this is what I mentioned earlier about, you would have your decision maker, your budget holder at that table. And so again, a misconception with co-production is that we're handing over the power and we're saying, well, here you go, what do you want to do with it? But that's not what we're saying. We're saying, let's talk about this together. What can we do? And so if you've got your budget holder or whoever's got authority for that budget in that space, they're part of that early conversation. So if people are saying things that they need, that we just don't have the resource to do that, then that's the conversation. It's, I can hear you. It sounds like this is what you need. We do not have the resource or the budget to do that. What else can we do? And there's something we do in training where we look at, I see in the question there, it says aspirations. We look at the impossible ask. So sometimes when we're working with people, they want these, I don't know, they want a swimming pool. They want a swimming pool in their community. And the local authority says, well, I can't do that. I can't give you a swimming pool. I've got no money. I've got no land. I've got no people to build you a pool. But you dig below it and you say, well, why do you need a pool? What is it about a pool? Is it that you want us to swim? Is it they need a community hub? Is it somewhere for your kids to go? Is it something about safety because you don't feel safe when you go to the beach? Like, there will be a reason that is beyond the swimming pool. And we try to meet people on this needs basis. So if, for example, exploring that swimming pool aspiration, we discover that actually that community has nowhere to go as a hub, there's nowhere for them to come together. Actually, what they want is the cafe that often is attached to the swimming pool, and they want that cafe so they've got somewhere to go together and just to meet up. And there isn't anywhere like that. Where is the nearest place like that? Is it actually a transport issue that we need more public transport to get to a cafe that's not that far away, but actually is if you can't drive? Or is it that there is opportunity to build a hub, to use an existing space as a hub, not opportunity to build a pool, but it's not about the pool. So it's about looking beyond the aspiration, looking at what is that need, what's that person telling you they need, and what do we have that can respond to that need. And it is very much about sharing a vulnerability, which is part of that mindset shift. As professionals, we kind of want to say, we've got it all and we've got the power and we're holding on to it. But it's about letting go of that and saying, this is what we can do, this is what we can't do, and really coming together and finding the consensus there. So yeah, I think my message there is having the right people around the table so we know what we can and can't do in terms of budgets and timeframes, being very open and honest in conversations early on, that, as Becky said, managing those expectations, and always digging deeper, go beyond whatever people say initially, what the big wants that they ask for. There are needs. We all have those basic universal needs as humans. And if we can tap into that, that's where we connect, and that's where we can build bridges. So I hope that answers it. There's no easy way to answer any of these questions, or anything actually in co-production, because it is so nuanced. But I hope that has helped with your question.
And just building out on that a little bit very quickly, I've just picked up one, and I don't think we'll answer this today, but just to note, have there been comparisons between outcomes of services which have and haven't been co-produced to see if the co-produced services lead to better outcomes? So almost like an A/B test, which I'm going to say, I don't know off the top of my head, but I think that would be an interesting one to take back. I know that, the example being there in health services, this should be possible using the data available within health services. So maybe I think that's one for us to take back and find out a little bit more. Could be an interesting experiment.
Yeah. And also it's a cycle. So whatever we learn, we take into the next iteration. So what is the next idea that comes out of that? So we're kind of naturally building on the strengths that we learn from an evaluation. So we're kind of learning as we go, aren't we? We're saying this did change, this didn't change. What are we going to do next to get better and stronger? And that includes each stage of that cycle. So the evaluation on the next stage will be stronger than the evaluation on the previous stage, because we've learned from it. And each time we do co-production, it feels more natural to us. So we become more confident and more able to have those tricky conversations, and more able to be upfront about things that aren't working. So I think, yeah, it's hard to look at that evaluation stage, isn't it, with that kind of meta lens of, was it the co-production? Was that the reason something changed, or was it going to change anyway? That's very tricky if there's no baseline to start with. But usually when we're working in this field, our baseline is the current system state. So that is, if we need to measure against something, it's that, because we're trying to change systems in small steps. But yeah, that's a hard thing to do. I would just say, because it's meant to be an ongoing conversation, and people will come and go, but the conversation and the learning continues. That I think that would probably happen quite organically through the process to see what has changed and what the reason it has changed.
Brilliant. Thank you, Trina. And then another question, moving us into a bit of practice, and maybe from, the thinking about how do we know it's worked, is how do we get it working? And the question is, often people with lived experiences will shy away from attending meetings about service development. So how have other areas supported people to attend? So I've done a bit of a written answer just to sort of start thinking about maybe what are those barriers, having those, thinking about the barriers, and they might be really, really sort of simple things around accessibility of venue or transport and location. It might be the language that we use. I think, I'm guilty of using sort of overly jargon and professional language that can be quite off-putting to people and not invite them into a space. So those are the sorts of things that I was thinking of around that. I suppose there's questions around incentivizing and payment for participation as well. Quite often we all like food, don't we? We come together over food, and meeting people in spaces where they are already, and going to meet people, and actually it not being about service development, but it being about a walk or a meal or a something, and having that conversation as part of an activity. So Trina, I'm just interested if you've got anything else to sort of add into that one.
Yeah, I think it is, like you said, it's meeting people where they're at, and to remember that this, the table that we refer to, coming around the table, is metaphorical, and so it often isn't the case that we get everybody together at the table. And as long as we are accessing those voices and enabling and supporting those voices, so the voices are heard at the table, it can be that sometimes we need to do some one-to-one separate work. So it might be a one-to-one phone call with somebody who, that somebody for many reasons doesn't want to come in or isn't able to come in, but they do want to have their say and they do want to be involved. So how can we involve them? And it might be that it takes a series of phone calls for them to trust us, to trust that one person on the other end of the phone. And then that might lead to, let's meet for a cup of tea somewhere. And then see, you're taking these little steps to really build that trust organically. It always comes down to trust and relationships when there's these trickier issues and time. We're so time pressured that probably when I say that, you think, well, I haven't got time to do that. And that's probably true. And you have to look at what your limitations are and what can you do within that. And to be honest with yourself and honest with your stakeholders and the people you are engaging with, as to what you can do, and with that, what you can't do. So absolutely, there's often a hesitancy or a fear, or I just don't want to come in and talk to you. But it's about, well, what can we do to reach you? Where can we come? Where do you already access that we can go? And also, when we're asking questions about services or whatever the question is we have to ask, we have to really be mindful that we don't want to be extractive, that we want to hear about that person's life. So this is a separate example. It's dementia again, but it's not related to the case study I talked about earlier. But we use an example in our training of dementia services that wanted to learn more about how it felt to receive those services. And there was a list of 10 questions, and it went along the lines of what was good about the services, what was not good about the services, what did you like about the services, what didn't you like about the services. So it's all about the services, and it was very much laid out about tell us what we need to know. And give us the answers we need to see. And so the person looking at those questions, you know, we would all probably eye roll at that, because it's not engaging us. It's not really, it doesn't sound like it cares about our experience. It just wants to know X, Y, and Z. Whereas if we asked a bigger, broader question, such as, what does it feel like to live with dementia in this region? That's the question. Then you're empowering that person to really talk to us about what it feels like. And they are the only person who knows what it feels like to be them with dementia living in this region now. They're the only ones. They're the only expert on that. And we're saying, we need to hear you. We want to hear you. And here's the time to hear you. And it means more work for us, because then we have to extract all those different bits that we need. But it will form that relationship, because that person will feel heard, which is very, very powerful. And then they're more likely to engage again because they feel listened to. So it's small tweaks that can take more time, but they are tweaks that enable these connections and these relationships that will build to make it easier the next time round.
Yeah, thank you, Trina. And the word that came to me then when you were talking was really about choice. And people have a choice whether or not they participate and you know, provide that information, but also having a choice of what that can look like. So is that a one-to-one conversation? Some people might love filling in surveys. I've just had a conversation with somebody this morning where, you know, they were like, I don't want to have a conversation over the phone with you, but I'm happy to fill in the form. And that's okay as well. And I think sometimes we can think of it too much the other way, that it is possible. And the other thing that cropped up for me then was that many of us, particularly people with lived experience, will have felt like that information's been taken from us, that word extractive is really powerful there. And so that sometimes you've had a really negative experience of being involved. So it's being aware of that and sort of cultivating that so that this time it becomes a positive experience. And part of that is feeding back. So it's not somebody's told you a load of information, you've given it, you know, and that's it. That is the piece of work. That's really, you know, isn't the end of co-production in that way. It's going back and demonstrating what changed as well. So as part of that evaluation, feeding back, that's great, thank you, this is the difference it made, would you like to be involved in the next bit? So ensuring that feedback, that circle is a circle rather than I don't know, a chain link or a squished something or something that isn't quite circular. So there's something like that. We've got a couple of minutes. So it's just a couple of things that I wanted to note that come up in chat. Was a question around, you know, the readiness of NHS dementia services and whether we think they're ready. And I would say, I think there's some really great pockets of good practice. There's lots of trickiness in that space. And I think when Trina was talking about the complexity involved and where you can enter this, that's really challenging. And readiness can look very different in different ways. And I guess I'm not the expert in NHS dementia services, so I wouldn't like to talk about readiness, but they would look for some really good practice and how can that be used and learned from. And a question that's just come in around, you know, that setting expectations to be realistic ones within resources, within those constraints. And again, I think that just comes back to that idea about that being vulnerable, being open and honest. And maybe when somebody asks for the impossible, understanding what underlies it. But there's nothing wrong with saying I can't do that or that's not possible. Those are all really valid answers. I don't know, I can't do that. And, you know, that's okay, isn't it? Is there anything else you'd like to add, Trina, just to those couple of pieces that you've covered so much so well?
Just with setting expectations to realistic ones, I think that that really comes down to that vulnerability we talked about before, and that openness and the honesty, which is again a shift from what we're used to, particularly with a professional hat on. And it is about learning to say what you can and can't do, and what those sharing that, no, I can't do that, but I could do this. Would this meet that need? And it's having that conversation and trusting. There's a lot of discomfort in co-production because we're not sure where it's going to go. We don't know we don't know exactly where we're headed. We'll have an idea. We don't really know. And so we do have to trust in the process. And the process really, when you break it all down, is about relationships and conversation, whatever that might look like. That's ultimately what it's about. So the more open and honest we can be about our boundaries and about our limitations, about our own expectations and our own ambitions, the more likely the group will be as well. When we all feel this feels odd, this feels uncomfortable, let's all feel it together, and trust each other, that it will begin to feel more comfortable the more we trust each other and hear each other and listen to each other. And often the answer to these questions we have been battling with for years, that answer will come from the person you least expect it to come from. But we need to enable the space to hear that so that we can find that person who has an answer. And then we all work together to achieve it. But yeah, I think for me, it's all about that relationship and having that open communication from the very beginning, from the invite through to the process.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So there's a couple of links to CoPro in the chat, so go back and find them. You can look through all our resources. You can find out about membership, and then ask those questions in more space. Thank you for indulging Trina and I in talking about some of our favourite things, and sharing with you some case studies and some practice that's out there. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks everyone for joining us today. So we have popped in some evaluation forms in the chat. If you could please fill those out, that would be amazing. This webinar will be available on YouTube from next week. We'll also have the slides on our website in English and Welsh, and we will send everyone a reminder email once they are live on the website. And hopefully we'll be able to share with you some of the contact details from Becky and Trina. So thanks again for joining us. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Take care, and we will see you for next month's webinar. Take care. Bye.